And now, without further ado, I present to you Yasmin Mogahed.
السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Let me start by saying it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's always really nice to see people take time out of their lives for things like this. I see these types of discussions as absolutely essential because we spend a lot of time focusing on taking care of our physical existence. We spend a lot of time worrying about our bodies, which is important. We spend a lot of time worrying about things like image and appearance, but not so much time is always spent on talking about the inner world and talking about our spiritual needs. And so I think it's extremely important that we do take time for these things, and I appreciate you coming, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put tawfiq in success and barakah in our time. If I can, before I begin, ask you for two favors, two requests. And that is that I ask that everyone in this room set an intention. And the reason I ask that, I try to ask this, whenever I speak to an audience, is that we're taught a few principles by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that first principle is that matters are by intention. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that all matters are by intention, وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى, and that everyone will have what they intend. And so intention is very important in everything that we do, that we set a purpose of what we hope to gain. And the other reason that this is important is that we have to set goals. We have to know where we're going if we want to end up there, right? So a destination is very important, right? When you're going somewhere and you take out your GPS, you need to know the address if you're going to end up there. You need to be clear on where you want to go, where you want to end up, for you to actually end up there. So I want to ask you, what do you hope to gain? What do you hope to take home with you? Why did you come? What do you hope to, what's your goal? And set that very clear within yourself. And, I'm assuming I have a mix of Muslims and maybe some non-Muslims, but for those who are Muslim, I want to ask you to make dua, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you that which you came to get, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah, blessing, and success in the time we have, so that everyone who came to get something goes home with it, and that it actually is something that's beneficial. So if you can just take a few moments just within yourselves and just do those two exercises. All right, are we kind of good? Yes, a nod? You need more time? No, you're good? Okay, cool. Can I ask if anyone wants to share what their goal is or what they hope to gain? And if you don't, that's fine. Yes?
Ajr.
Ajr. Okay, ajr means reward. Jazakallah khair. Simple and powerful. Anyone else? Yes?
To get something out of this evening and to be beneficial, learn, and constantly learn more about my deen in the process while enjoying time with friends.
Okay, excellent. Yes?
For me, it's kind of like a reality check or a checkpoint. Sometimes I feel like I really just need a boost of some sort, and in person it's just a bit better for me than it is like over listening to lectures online.
Okay, so that boost. So reward, boost, learning more about the deen. Anyone else? Yes?
I guess I noticed that it fell on Mental Health Awareness Week, and because I'm going to school for, mental health and counseling, I figured it would be really nice to come and just learn more and kind of get an Islamic perspective on that as well.
Excellent. So the mental health aspect of spiritual well-being. Yes?
I want to be more spiritual and less materialistic.
That's a great goal. I want to be more spiritual and less materialistic. Okay. So these are all great intentions, and I hope that, inshallah, that this can be a stepping stone in that direction. So on that note, we live in a world, as many of you have alluded to, that is quite distracting, and it can be quite materialistic. And what does that mean? It means that there are basically two parts to our existence. One part is the physical or the seen world, the things that we can see and feel and touch. And then we know that there is the unseen world, the things that we can't see. We can't see the soul. We can't see the spiritual heart. We can't see God. We can't see angels. That there is an entire world that's unseen. And what often happens, and this is natural because it's unseen, the unseen world gets sort of forgotten. And there's a lot of focus on the seen world. And in other words, the material world, the materialistic aspect of our existence. Now, of course, with the type of world that we live in today, modern society, you see even more of that, because now there's so many different ways to be distracted, right? You can't just be, right? You have to constantly be plugged in, constantly be stimulated. There's almost like we have an epidemic addiction to our phones and to social media. And all of these things have an impact on our spirituality and our mental health. And the reason for that is that the heart, the spiritual heart, is much like the physical body. Now, the physical body has certain needs, right? To stay alive, to be healthy. And all of us, we understand those needs. We understand, for example, that we have to breathe, yeah? And it was funny because she's like, try not to move. I was thinking, don't breathe either. But we have to breathe to stay alive, right? We know that our body needs oxygen. And we know what happens if we're deprived of oxygen. Even a child knows this, right? We know that we have to eat. We know that we have to keep ourselves purified physically, right? No one says, I don't need to take a shower because I did that last September, right? Or last October. We constantly have to keep purifying our bodies. We take consistent showers. We know that there's certain things we have to do to protect our bodies, right? We know that when it's very cold outside, you have to put on a jacket. We know these things. But often what happens is that we don't really know how to take care of our hearts. We don't know how to take care of our souls. And the human being is not just a physical body. The human being is also heart and soul. And the physical, the spiritual part of the human being is just as important as the physical. And one could argue that may be even more important. And I'll explain why. When you think about the physical body, and of course we have to take care of our physical body because this is a trust from God. But when you think about the physical body, how long is it gonna last? How long does your body last? How long does anyone's body last? Well, at most maybe 100 years, right? Most people aren't gonna live that long. What happens after 100 years to our physical body? Well, everyone knows, whether they're Muslim or they're Christian or they're Jewish or they're agnostic or they're atheist, knows that the physical body after 100 years disintegrates, right? Everyone agree? But what happens to the soul? What happens to the spiritual aspect of the human being? Well, we believe that the spiritual part of the human being, the soul, does not disintegrate. The soul actually remains. So it's something to reflect on, that within myself, there's a part of me that's going to pass away, and there's a part of me that's going to remain. Everyone with me? Which one am I taking care of? Right? It's something to reflect on, because the tragedy is that many of us, we take care of the part that's actually passing away. You know, you're going to put in, and what's going to be the return, right? Investment and return. And when you think about that, it's not wise to invest in something where there's going to be no return. Or it's not wise to neglect something where there's going to be, it's actually like extremely important return, and you're not careful about your investment. And what's happening here is that we sort of live our lives in a way it's not very logical, because we put a lot of investment in temporary things and we neglect things which are eternal. And so I want to just emphasize why this discussion is important and why it's important that we focus on the building of the heart and the spiritual self. So what are we told in the Quran about the heart? Well, one of the lessons that we're taught in the Quran about the heart is that when we return back to our Creator, what's going to benefit and what's going to matter isn't going to be the money that we made. It's not going to be how we looked, how our body looked like. It's not going to be how many followers we had on social media. It's going to be one thing, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. So when Allah talks about going back to the Creator, and He says, there's this really beautiful dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Prophet Abraham, and he says, وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ. He says, do not disgrace me on the day when everyone is going to be brought back. And on that day, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ, the day when nothing will benefit anyone, of wealth or children. And when you look at these two things, wealth, we know wealth, right? This is something we chase in this life. It's something that people feel powerful when they have it. And children here it's sort of like a representation of power, at that time. So power, children, wealth, these things are not going to benefit anyone. What will? إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Except for the one who returns back to God with a heart that is sound. And this is what I want to talk about. What is qalbun salim? What does it mean to have a healthy heart? And how does that relate to having healthy spiritual and mental well-being? How does the heart relate to our mental health and our spiritual well-being? And what does that mean? And then how do we get there? So what I want to do is I want to give you guys two analogies. One is the analogy of a journey, and the other is the analogy of the body. So the first one is the analogy of a journey. When you guys are going on a trip, there's a few things that you need in that journey. So we've already kind of talked about the fact that we are on a journey, and it's a spiritual journey. It's a journey of our hearts back to our Creator. It's a journey of our soul. So on this journey, what do we need to be successful? Well, the first thing is when you're going somewhere, you need to know where you're going. How do you know which way to turn? How do you know which way to go? What do we typically use? GPS, right? We can't live without it. That is guidance. See, if I don't have guidance, if I don't have the address and I don't have someone or a map telling me, if I don't have my GPS or a map telling me which way to turn, I'm going to get lost. Yes or no? Absolutely. And it's the same thing with this journey in life. If I don't have guidance, I get lost. I will not be able to find my way through this life unless I have guidance. And the question becomes, where are we seeking guidance? See, there's a lot of places that a person can look for how they should act, what's their standard. These are things we have to ask ourselves. What's my source of guidance? What tells me how I live my life? What's my criteria of good and evil? What tells me right from wrong? This is an essential question we have to ask. Because when we get confused about that, that's why we get lost. Because we don't have like a proper map. We're not even clear on what our map is, right? Or our GPS isn't really working. And so we end up getting lost. So one very important question we have to ask ourselves is, what's my criteria? What guides me? And everyone has something different that guides them. one of the most common sort of guides, I'd say, in our modern society right now is our desires. Our desires. So this is this phenomenon that whatever you feel, whatever you want, whatever you desire, whatever urges you have, obey them. You know Sprite, right? What Sprite tell you to do? Obey your thirst. Good. What does Nike tell you to do? Just do it. Great. Does anyone know what Pepsi tells you to do? Live for now. Live for now. And the O is a Pepsi sign. And now. So there's a theme here, right? And that theme is obey your desires. YOLO, right? You only live once. Live it up, right? That's it. You got this life and that's it. So maximize pleasure. Worship your desires. It's literally a type of worship. Because what is worship, essentially? Well, worship isn't just praying. You know what worship is? Worship, as defined for us, is when you say, Sami'na wa ata'na. Worship is we hear and we obey. That's what worship is. When you worship something, it's your master, right? You're a slave. So when master says do, you hear and you obey. Do you understand? That's what a slave is. So when your desire says do, and you just say, I hear and I obey, you are a slave to your desires. And this is a very, very serious problem that we have in our society today. Because it's stuffed down our throats. It's actually taught to us and forced upon us that you must obey your desires, that you must worship your desires, that in fact you are a slave to your desires. Realize that every single person takes some sort of master. This master becomes what we enslave ourselves to, right? Even an atheist has a master. You understand? Even an agnostic has a master, has something that they worship. Not in prayer, but in obedience. Do you understand? You become enslaved to this thing, whatever it happens to be. But everyone has a master. In our deen, this is called an ilah. You know the word ilah? Where have you heard this word before? In the shahada, right? What's the shahada? What makes you a Muslim? Ashhadu, I bear witness, and la ilaha illallah. So you're saying, I bear witness that there's no ilah except God. Okay? But everyone has an ilah. Every single person. Whether you believe in God or you don't, you have an ilah. The ilah is that thing that you worship. It's the thing that determines how you live your life, why you live your life, what you obey, what's your master. So one of the most prevalent masters that especially we have right now in our society is the master of my own desire. We are actually told to worship our desires. If you feel it, do it. And what happens, and you'll find this is what's going to happen. Right and wrong, you know, black and white, these things, morality becomes just based on what I feel. If I feel it, then it's right. And if I don't feel it, then it's wrong. So I become the source of right and wrong. And I'm sure you can imagine how dangerous that would be. Is that whatever, I mean, imagine a person who doesn't like their car, so they like their neighbor's car, so they desire that car. So does that mean it's okay to go take it? Right? You might have a desire due to your anger to go beat someone up. But is it okay to do it just because you feel it? And the answer is no. But there is a huge, there's a lot of confusion right now. There's a lot of confusion right now, and it stems and it's rooted in this particular issue. And that is, if you feel a desire, if you feel an attraction, obey it. And just because you have that desire and you have that attraction, it immediately makes it okay. And that is essentially the problem. And it's a very deep-rooted problem, and right now we're seeing the effect of that in various different spheres, right? You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, yeah? And the problem here is that we have to go back to ask, what are we worshiping? What's our ilah? What is our ilah? What makes something right and wrong? And is right and wrong above my desire? Or does my desire determine right and wrong? You understand? This argument that just because I feel an attraction to someone, that becomes okay for me to obey that desire, comes and it's rooted in this idea that I worship my own desire. Does that make sense? There has to be a higher morality of right and wrong. And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Who determines it? Who determines your GPS? That's the question you have to ask. What's guiding you in this journey? What's telling you turn right? No, don't turn left. No, that's the wrong way. No, make a U-turn. And that's what we have to ask. And as believers, we know that this is Allah and His Messenger. He gives us that guidance. Now, on this journey, we need guidance, yeah? So that's very important. Where are we getting our guidance? The second thing we need is when you're on a journey, you're gonna sometimes hit obstacles, yeah? You're gonna hit potholes, you're gonna hit blocked roads, construction. What would happen if every time you made a wrong turn, can you imagine driving, and every time you made a wrong turn, you said, you know what, the GPS is like, you know what, you made a wrong turn, you might as well just pull over and give up. Just stop driving. Right? Just, that's it. You made, you turn, you missed your exit, so just stop, pull over, turn off the car. Right? That doesn't happen. What happens when you make a mistake when you're driving? What does the GPS do? Reroutes you. Okay, great. So that rerouting is extremely essential in life. When we make a wrong turn, when we make mistakes, and we will falter, we will slip, we will make mistakes because it's part of being human. And if a person gives up every time they make mistakes, it'll be like a person who just stops driving every time they make a wrong turn. They're not going to ever end up at their destination. So one of the things we have to be able to do is have that ability to reroute, that ability to keep going even after we fall, even after we make a mistake, and to not lose hope, and to be able to go back and get back on the road. Does that make sense? So that's extremely important too, is being able to handle our going off track and our mistakes. Now, what else do we have to do when we're driving? We have to be very conscious of what we focus on. Now, this is one of the mistakes we make, and this affects us spiritually, and this affects us psychologically. There's an important psychological principle that you have to remember, and that is that whatever you focus on grows. Whatever you focus on grows. So what does that mean in life? It means if you're a person who focuses on all the things that are going wrong, or all the things that are difficult, or the darkness, or negativity, guess what happens? It grows. It surrounds you. If you're a problem-focused person, you're always going to be anxious. And the reason for that is that whatever you focus on, it grows and it surrounds you. And on the other hand, if you're a person who focuses on positivity, if you're a person who focuses on what you have, it also grows. And this is that power of now in this this new age discussion all about positive psychology, right? What is positive psychology about? Well, it's all about how do we improve our quality of life and increase well-being and develop flourishing and all these kinds of concepts. You know what they found when they talk about happiness now? You know, because psychology is kind of taken, like, now they've moved away from the traditional psychology. Now, positive psychology isn't as interested in looking at disease as it is just, let's look at how we can just be happier people. There's a lot of research right now about increasing well-being and being happier. And you know what they found? One of the most powerful ways to just be a happier person and to increase your well-being is the power and the practice of gratitude. Why is that? Why is gratitude so powerful? I mean, they found in studies that keeping a simple gratitude journal, writing 3 to 5 things every day that you're grateful for, is so powerful that it can actually help treat depression. And this is just that simple shift in what you focus on. Because whatever you focus on, it grows. I always use this example. It's a simple but powerful example. So I saw this meme once. Yeah, that's always a scary way to start a sentence. I saw this meme once where there was a picture of two pictures of this little boy. And the top picture had a little boy who was holding one slice of cake. And he was really, really happy because he had a slice of cake, right? And then below him was another little boy holding an entire cake, missing one slice, and he was sad. So what's the difference between the two boys? Well, first tell me who has more cake. The second one, the one who's sad. Yeah, he actually has more cake, but he's sad. Tell me why he's sad and the other one's happy. It's simply focus. The difference between the two boys is what they chose to focus on. The one on the top chose to focus on what he had. He had a slice of cake. That was his focus, so he was happy. That is the power, that is the practice of gratitude. The one on the bottom had 13 slices, but he was missing one. And that one was the one he was focused on, and so he was sad. Do you see that? This is the power of focus. And what you focus on grows. If you focus on that thing that you have missing in your life, you will always feel poor. You'll feel deprived. You'll feel impoverished. Even if you're rich. But if you focus on what you have, you'll always feel rich. Even if you don't have a lot. Does that make sense? And it's the power of focus. And so in any given situation, you choose what you focus on. And there's a very, very powerful principle that we're taught in the Quran. How many people know what this ayah means? Inna ma'al usri yusra. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Yes?
With hardship.
Okay, great. Oftentimes, people mistranslate this verse. And they say that it means after hardship comes ease. You've heard that a lot, right?
Yeah.
This ayah, and there's another ayah in the Quran which talks about after hardship, but this ayah says, Inna ma'al usri yusra, which means with, and I'm going to emphasize the word with. With hardship comes ease. That's very, the with here is very important. Because what it indicates is this. See, a lot of people feel like life is kind of all bad or all good. You ever fall into that? You feel like, you know what, I got good times and I got bad times, right? And right now, it's bad times. But that's actually a myth. It's not true. You never have all good or all bad. No one does. That's not the nature of the world. The nature of the world is that at every given moment, there is both good and bad. That at every given moment, there is both difficulty and ease at the same time. Yes, you may have challenges. But at the same exact moment that you have challenges, you also have blessings. Blessings don't wait. You know what I mean? It's never all bad. And so what happens is that what changes our experience is what we choose to focus on. When you think for a moment, just think within yourself about the hardest time in your life. Maybe it's now. Maybe it was something else in the past. If you reflect on that time, if you bring that to mind, it might have been extremely difficult, but at the same time, did you have health? Did you have safety? Did you have family? Did you have, wealth? Did you have, peace of? There was one thing in your life, or maybe 5 things in your life that were difficult, but there were countless other blessings at the same time. And what happens is that what changes how we experience any moment is which we choose to focus on. Inna ma'al usri yusra. With the hardship is the ease. So am I going to choose to focus on the hardship, or am I going to choose to focus on the ease? And this is actually transformational. What you choose to focus on in any given situation, because what you focus on grows. There's another powerful principle, and that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَإِنْ شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. This is the other powerful principle, that if you are thankful, if you are grateful, Allah says, I will increase you. And now this is again the power of gratitude, is that when you're grateful for something, you get more. The fastest way to increase your blessings, the best way to protect your blessings is to be grateful for them. And it works the other way around too. The fastest way to lose a blessing? Anyone know? Take it for granted. The fastest way to lose any good thing is to take it for granted. And this works, this is a divine principle. This also works with human beings, isn't it? Right? When you take someone for granted, suppose someone is really, really kind to you, really generous, and you just keep taking it for granted, what ends up happening? Does that increase that behavior or decrease it? When you take someone for granted, it decreases that good behavior. That good thing that you're taking for granted, it makes it decrease. Whereas when you show appreciation for someone who's kind or generous, what does that do to the behavior? Anyone? It increases it, right? The best way to motivate behavior is to just appreciate it. And this is how it works as a divine principle. If we are thankful, if we're grateful, Allah increases us. There's something else I want to point out about this ayah. Inna ma'al usri yusra. So we said the first part I wanted to emphasize was the ma'a, right? The with. That they happen at the same time. Don't ever think that things are all bad. They're never going to be all bad. It's impossible, because it's not the nature of dunya. It's not the nature of life. Allah always gives ease at the same time as hardship. The other point I want to make about these ayats, Inna ma'al usri yusra, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is linguistically, it's a linguistic miracle, but it also gives us this meaning, is that the word for difficulty is singular in this verse. So there's one difficulty, and the word for ease is plural. So do you see the other lesson here? Is that it's not one-to-one, okay? It isn't like God is giving you, for every hardship, there's only one ease. It doesn't work like that. For every one hardship, there's plural, many eases. And so our blessings are more than our hardships. Our ease is more than our difficulty. But if we shift our focus to only looking at that one hardship, it'll look the other way around. To us, it will look like our difficulties more. And that's all has to do with focus. There's another point about focus that I want to emphasize. And that is, you are what you eat. Right? Yeah. You are what you eat physically, right? Right? If you eat really unhealthy food, you're going to be really unhealthy. Okay, guys? All right. If you eat healthy food, you're going to be really? Okay, great. Okay. So it's a principle. We understand. Our body is affected by what we intake, right? It's the same principle works spiritually. You are what you eat spiritually. What does that mean? Everything you read, everything you look at, everything you listen to, everything you talk about is all input. Spiritual input. Psychological input. All right? Realize that the body, the human being, is a system. And everything you put in, it has an effect. And so what we focus on in our lives has an impact on who we become internally. Does that make sense? What happens to our hearts? What happens to our minds? It's affected by what we're taking in every single day. The things that the people that we follow on social media, the things that we read, the concerns that we have, what we watch. Every single thing, every single one of these are pieces of data, input, that goes to the heart, that goes to the soul. So what does that look like practically? I'll just give you an example. Okay, a person who is only surrounded with material things, meaning everything on their social media is about material things. Everyone around them just cares about material things. Every conversation is about material things. Everything they read is about material things. Everything they talk about is material things. Everything they think about is material things. What do you think is going to be most important to that human being? You guys are brilliant. Honestly, I don't know why I'm here. It's simple. And that is essentially the issue. That is the problem. It's like, I don't want to be materialistic, say, yeah? But everything around me, everything that I read, let's just look at our newsfeed. Let's just look at our newsfeed, right? You know, this is what I tell people. Think about your newsfeed, whatever newsfeed that is, whoever it is that you're following, whatever it is that you're looking at, right, in your feed every day. Think of that like your fridge. That's your fridge. That's what you're going to eat that day. Okay? That's what you're going to eat that day. So whatever's on there, that's what you're taking in, isn't it? And so you have to ask yourself, what kind of food is it? How is it? Is it healthy? Is it something that's good for your mental health and psychological and spiritual health? Or is it a couple bottles of poison, some molded cheesecake? You know what I'm saying? You have to ask yourself that these are the, if you wanna work on your insides, you have to look at what you're putting in your insides. And that is really, like, in the day and age that we live right now, your social media is a big part of that. Because that's what you're looking at that's what you're eating every single day. So one very simple way is to look at your newsfeed and just look at the quality of it. Just take a look. What's on there? For some people, it's a lot of really terrible, bad news. You know those bad news people? Do you know what I'm talking about? So, people are going to come and say, but we need to know what's happening in the world. Yes, we do. But it's actually quite problematic when every single thing around you is really dark. And it can have an effect on you internally and psychologically. And you have to be careful. Because at the end of the day, if all the lights turned off in this room and it was really dark, yes, there would be darkness. And darkness is a fact at that point. Yeah, it's dark. But the question I have for you is, if everyone took out their phone and just posted and tweeted and Snapchatted about how it was dark, did it change anything about the darkness? Like, did anything change? Yes or no? But we all talked about it, we all wrote about it, we all told everyone, we sat and talked amongst ourselves. You know what's really dark in here? It's really dark. You know the lights turned off? Did you know? And everyone's just talking about it in posts. But we haven't actually done anything to change that situation, have we? Wouldn't it be more beneficial if someone went and got a candle or a light to change that situation? And I think sometimes what happens is, when things are dark around us, we tend to sort of get lost in it. Maybe just talking about it, posting about it, reading about it. But what ends up happening is when you were just sort of focusing on every single hate crime that happened. I'll tell you the first thing that happened. The first thing is that within your own psyche, you exaggerated the problem. Meaning, I'll tell you, the problem might have been this big, like on a larger scale, but your focus on it actually made it look bigger than it is. So now you're afraid to leave your house, or you're afraid to wear your hijab, or now you're so scared you want to take off your hijab or wear a baseball hat instead, right? So my point is that happened. Why? It happened because your focus on it made it actually, it grew it more than it is in real life. And that's what happens, is that what you focus on grows. And so you have to be very careful to find that balance between wanting to contribute and wanting to be aware and getting sort of lost in darkness, getting lost in really negative things, because it will have an effect on you both spiritually and psychologically. So that's something that I, when I talk about focus, there's that aspect. The other aspect is just, like I said, your newsfeed. So there's the very negative one. There's also the one where it's just like burgers and every other thing. It's like there's this strange rule now that you can't eat until you first take a photo and post it of what you're about to eat, right? And so like your whole newsfeed is just a bunch of burgers and what people are eating for lunch and breakfast, and that's all cool, but the question becomes, when what you're taking in is it healthy? Is it something that's enriching you? And that's the least of the problems. I think one of the other issues that we have is that we live in a world now that is increasingly obsessed with appearances. Like obsessed, capital O, right? Anyone feel me? We're obsessed with appearances. We're obsessed with a certain image of perfection, right? You have to be perfect. You have to look perfect. Your life needs to be perfect. Your relationship needs to be perfect. Your skin needs to be perfect. And if it isn't, there's a filter for it, right? And the idea here is that we're so caught up in appearing perfect, and then we're so caught up in looking at other people putting on their photoshopped life. You know that one of the problems with doing this is that it creates a sense within ourselves. Number one is it becomes, because we're so focused on appearances, this becomes the most important thing to us. If you want to change what matters most to you, change what you're looking at, reading, following every single day. Because what you focus on grows. And remember, you are what you eat. So if every single thing that you're following is just about looks, it's every various ways to contour your face. I know there's lots of ways, right? And then every way to do your hijab, that's cool. But if that's it, you know what I'm saying? If it's just fashion and it's just different ways to do your face and different, what's in style? Oh, okay, that's so yesterday. Now this is in style, and that's it. Then what happens is that shifts your priority. So within your own heart, that becomes most important. And you know what happens after that? That's why we live now in a world where people are more and more dissatisfied, and people are more and more insecure. And that's because there's this intense amount of pressure that you have to look a certain way, you have to dress a certain way, you have to appear a certain way. And if you don't, you constantly feel inadequate. So this is also affecting us psychologically and spiritually, because what matters most isn't the appearances. But I'm telling you, on a practical level, when you change what you're looking at and reading and interacting with every single day, your focus changes and internally you change. So this is why one exercise, one practical thing you can do is, I don't know, use this like amazing thing called unfollow. and what that does, no one has to know. Just clean out your fridge. Just look at your fridge and just clean it out and say, you know what? Maybe this isn't that healthy. You know, I mean, I know it's important what the Kardashians are doing, but maybe I don't need to follow it. And maybe I can put more healthy food in my fridge. Something that will actually enrich me, that will teach me, that will help me develop myself internally. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Now, here's the other part I want to talk about, and that is when we go through this journey, there's going to be times when we get hurt. There's going to be times when we face, a lot of obstacles. There's going to be storms in our lives. We're going to have to be able to know how to handle that. One thing that happens is that I think we generally live in a world where we know kind of how to take care of our bodies, when we get hurt. We know that we go to the doctor. We know if you get cut, you have to clean the wound, and there's a process we know how to do. But I think emotionally we don't have those skills. We're not really equipped with what I call emotional first aid, or what psychologists call emotional first aid. And that is, how do I deal with the pain in my life? How do I deal with the challenges? How do I deal with stress, chronic stress? How do I deal with just being a student, right? I don't think we have this emotional first aid. And I would add to that spiritual first aid. And I'm just going to kind of put those together. Let me just say this. And I want to summarize so that I can open up for discussion and questions. I said I'm going to give you two analogies, the journey and the body. And I want to just bring it back full circle to the beginning when I talked about the heart being like the body, and you have certain things that you have to do to take care of it. And there's going to be certain things that you have to do when you get injured physically. And it works exactly the same way spiritually and emotionally. Okay. First, I want to just talk briefly about taking care of the heart, and then I'm talking about healing quickly. We need oxygen to stay alive, yeah? Everyone agree? You don't seem too short. You're good? We're good, okay. Spiritually, we also need oxygen. And what I have come to know from, various, research and study, if you look at the Quran, you look at the Sunnah, and all the stories that were given, and all the text, you can come out with is that the spiritual oxygen is the prayer, is the Salah. Salah, or prayer, is what connects us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what literally oxygenates our hearts. If a person doesn't pray, it's like a person who doesn't breathe. And so when we talk about spiritual well-being, and this spiritual, first aid kit, the first thing that we have to have in that is prayer. Just like, I can't talk to you about taking care of your body if you're not breathing, right? That would be pretty weird if I sat up here and I was like, okay, we're gonna work out, we're gonna eat, raw, organic, and none of you are breathing, right? I've missed something important in talking about well-being. If I'm not telling you have to breathe, by the way, before we can talk about anything else, you gotta breathe to stay alive. And this is how it works spiritually. I can't talk about spiritual well-being without talking about spiritual oxygen first, and that's the prayer. And the Salah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed Salah, and by the way, the prescription of Salah was done in a very unique way, unlike any of the other commandments, unlike any of the other pillars, unlike any of the other things that were given to the Prophet ﷺ. The command to pray was given in Isra and Mi'raj, which means that the rest of the commandments came down to the Prophet, peace be upon him, through Angel Jibreel, right? But for Salah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought the Prophet up to the heavens. Like even the way in which Salah was given to the Prophet ﷺ was unique. It was very special. And that was when the Prophet ﷺ was ascended to the heavens. And that is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the commandment of Salah. Salah is the first thing we're asked about on the Day of Judgment. And the Prophet ﷺ said that if our Salah is in order, then that person will be successful. And if it's not, the person will have failed. And that's because Salah is that essential oxygen that we need just to stay alive spiritually. The other thing about Salah to keep in mind is, you know when a doctor gives you a prescription, and suppose a person is very ill, and they need this medicine to stay alive, right? And the medicine's given at particular times, right? The doctor says you have to take it in the morning, and then take it again at noon, and then take it again. And if this medicine is keeping you alive, you're probably going to take it as prescribed, right? No one's going to be like, well, today I have an exam, so I'll skip 3 doses, right? Or better yet, I'm studying for finals this week, so I'll breathe next week, right? I'm busy. We don't do that. We know we have to breathe to stay alive. We know we have to take the medicine as it's prescribed in order to continue to be healthy. And this is how it works with the spiritual prescription of Salah, is that Allah, and He's high above any analogy of a doctor, He knows, and He knows what He's doing when He commands and when He gave us that prescription at specific times. So taking that medicine and taking it on time. Breathing to stay alive, regardless. One other thing that happens is sometimes when we feel low, we sometimes want to give up, especially the Salah. Like, you know what, I don't feel like it. I can't pray. I'm really having a low period. That's like a person who says, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit sick, like maybe you have the flu, so I'm going to stop breathing. That's the same thing. To say that, you know what, because I'm sick right now, I'll stop breathing, and once I feel better, I'll start breathing again. You guys understand the logic? Or the illogic? Do you understand? It's that oxygen that's going to help you to actually get better, even if you're feeling sick. And that's what happens with prayer, is that if we give up our prayer because we're feeling down, we'll only get more down. It's not, if we continue to breathe and we continue to take that oxygen, then eventually we'll come back up. And this is, I think, one of the most important parts of the spiritual, like first aid kit, is that no matter what, you gotta breathe. Do you guys understand? No matter what, you need oxygen, right? It's like a non-negotiable for any of us. It doesn't matter how busy we are, it doesn't matter how upset we are, we keep breathing, right? And that's how it works with Salah. And if a person really does that and really commits to their Salah, to their prayer, then our ups and downs of life, they don't destroy us. They don't destroy us. We go through ups and downs, but eventually we come back up. I'll tell you, the way that a person comes down and then just keeps going down is when they give up their spiritual oxygen. That's why people hit what we would call rock bottom, is that it has to do with letting go of that part of what's keeping your heart alive and keeping it healthy. So Salah is the first thing. The second thing I recommend in this toolkit, right, in this emotional or spiritual toolkit, is the adhkar. And when I say adhkar, there are prayers that the Prophet ﷺ used to say throughout his day. And like, we all have busy days, right? So nowadays there's like apps for dua, right? One of the ones that I found to be really good is called My Dua. It's spelled MYDUAA. How many of you have ever heard of Fortress of a Muslim? This collection. Most of you have, right? It's just a collection of the supplications of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and from the Quran. And what it is it's just organized. For every single walk of life, there's a prayer. Why is this important? Now this may seem like, well, what's the big deal? The reason this is important is what it does is it focuses the heart on God, on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even while the body is going through the mundane. Does that make sense? So you're leaving your house, you're starting to drive, you're traveling, you're eating, there's a prayer for everything. And so what that does is it allows us to be taking care of our spirituality even while we're taking care of our worldly affairs. Because at the end of the day, we're not taught to just be monks and pull away from society. And spirituality in Islam doesn't mean you have to go to a cave, right? Spirituality, we're taught by the Prophet ﷺ that spirituality is something that you can do within your life, while you're in school, while you're married, while you're a doctor, while you're a parent. You understand? It's not about leaving the world. It's not about leaving the world. And this is something that, one of you had mentioned, is that wanting to be less materialistic and more spiritual. A person can be surrounded with money and still not be attached to it. So a person can continue to live and be, the Prophet ﷺ used to play every role, right? He was married, he had children, he was a leader, he had friends, he had companions. He was involved in worldly life, but internally he was connected to God. And how does that happen practically? That's a concept, right? That's theoretical. How does that happen practically? It's through these adhkar. That's how you go from point A to point B. That you're in your life, but internally you're connected to God. So it's not about leaving the world, but about being spiritual within the world. And that's what the adhkar does practically. So if you download this app, this is the thing about it, is that there's a supplication for everything. You're studying for an exam, you're going through a difficult time, you're afraid, you're having a lot of anxiety about something. Just going through your daily life. There's a supplication for everything. Even intimacy, there's a supplication. So what it teaches us is that everything in this life can actually bring us closer to Allah if we do it in the right way and we remember Him. So the adhkar. And then finally, the third part is connecting our hearts to the Quran, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we're told that it's actually a cure. Allah says shifa, that the Quran is a cure, shifa'un lima fi sudur, for what is in the hearts, what is in the chest. And then finally, so these are the kind of the three maintenance part. And then finally is just the emotional well-being of healing. And that is this. This is a bigger discussion, like it's its own discussion. But to summarize, we have to find a balance between two extremes. One extreme is when imagine a person gets a gunshot wound, right? They get hurt. And they just take a Band-Aid, cover it up, and say, I'm good. What's going to happen to that wound? Anyone? It's going to actually get infected, yeah? And then over time, that infection might grow so much that this person either will need to amputate or they can actually die of the infection. Now, why is that? It's because, but wait, doesn't time heal all wounds? Someone tell me why not. This cliche, time heals all wounds? In this case, why didn't time heal the gunshot wound? It wasn't treated, thank you. It was just covered up. And this is what happens emotionally and psychologically, is that sometimes when we're in pain, we go through a painful experience, we go through trauma, and our way of dealing with it is just to cover it up, right? Just numb it, right? You can keep taking that painkiller, but it hasn't addressed the actual infection. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make. It doesn't make it go away. It actually makes it worse. And in this case, time is not healing that wound, it's making it worse. And that's because it wasn't treated. How do you treat these wounds? Well, that's another process. Sometimes it involves getting mental health, getting counseling. Sometimes it involves going to the doctor. But what is that process? You have to go through that process. And whether you go to a doctor or you go for counseling, one essential part of healing is going to God, is going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because one of the attributes of Allah is a shafi. He is the healer. And even if you go to a doctor, the doctor is a tool. Allah is the healer. Does that make sense? So Allah is ultimately the one who heals, but we go to doctors and we're told to take these means, going to a counselor, going for therapy. But Allah is ultimately the healer. So always going back to Allah. The other extreme. So we said one extreme is to cover it up. The other extreme is what I call picking the scab. And this is another mistake that sometimes we make, and that is that we don't allow things to heal because we keep picking at it. Anyone have picking scab problems? I wouldn't know anyone who does that. Okay, I have a major problem with picking scabs. But basically, what happens with picking a scab in the physical body is that your body is naturally healing itself when it makes a scab, right? Assuming you've treated it and it's not infected, now it's scabs over. But what happens if you keep picking it? What happens to the healing process? What have you done? You keep stopping the healing process. You're actually slowing down the healing. You're pausing the healing every time you pick a scab. And sometimes we do this psychologically. We do this emotionally. And there's various ways that we do this. But one of the ways is that we get stuck in the past. We get stuck in the past. What does that mean? The past, there's this quote, and that I read once. It says, "The past is a place of reference, not a place of residence." Yeah? The past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. If you make your past a place of residence, that's picking the scab. You're not allowing that natural process of moving forward and healing because you keep picking at it. It's like a person who's driving. You know when you're driving and you have to look forward, right? Not sure? Look forward, right? You probably don't drive a lot around here, right? Because you'll walk everywhere. But when you drive, you gotta look forward. But there's also this thing called a rear view mirror, right? What's the purpose of a rear view mirror? To give you an idea of what's behind you, right? But what would happen if someone stopped looking forward and just fixated on the rear view? You would crash. Man, you guys are amazing. So, this is the problem. In life, you're moving forward. So you need to look forward. Yes, you reference the rear view, but if you stay fixated on the past, you will crash. And that's one of the other mistakes that we make. We have to have that middle ground. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. I want to pause there and open it up for questions or reflections or whatever you want to say or ask. Don't all speak at once. Yes.
At the beginning you said we all had an ilah.
Yes.
And that we're so sucked into this materialistic world and following our desires. So doesn't that technically mean we're committing shirk?
Okay, so her question is, when I said that we all have an ilah and we sometimes get sucked into these materialistic desires, doesn't that mean we're committing shirk? It's a form of shirk. It's, well, okay, so technically, there's shirk al-akbar and shirk al-asghar, right? There's major shirk. Well, by the way, let me define shirk. Shirk is associating a partner with God, right? Yes, there's major shirk, which is to pray to other than God, to say God has a partner, a son, a father. But then there's also minor shirk. Yes, one way that we commit minor shirk is, for example, riyah, like showing off, praying not for God, but so people will look at us and say, wow, that person's so holy. So that's a type of minor shirk. Now, in terms of taking another ilah, it's like within the heart, there's like a core part of the heart. And this is something I talk about in both of my books, because it's an essential part of understanding why we do what we do and why we actually experience pain. This is another thing. In talking about pain, like pain is a part of life, right? But there is like a really, really deep type of pain, both emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, that comes out of putting something other than God at the core of our hearts. that's like deep, but we don't have a lot of time to discuss it more, but putting something other than God at the core of our hearts. And in other words, that's taking something other than God as an ilah. And some people do that with money. Some people do that with their desires. Some people do that with another human being. Like, what happened to Romeo and Juliet? Why did they end up committing suicide? It's because there was a type of, it's like almost like they took the other as an ilah. And when you take someone and you put them at that place where only God should be, it causes like destruction internally. It's very painful. And so, yes, definitely it is a type of, it's a shirk in love, for example. And Allah says in the Quran, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. That there are people who take rivals with God. So it is like shirk. Why? They love them as they should only love God. So there is definitely this rivalry that happens with love. And a lot of times it can be our career. It can be our money. It can be our child. You know, I talk about this idea of like, a lot of cultures actually teach women to take their children and put the child at the center of their life and then do tawaf around them. You know, like just revolve their existence around this child. And then we're told this is called being a good mother. But it's unhealthy and it's an imbalance because only God should be at the center. And when God's at the center, then you can have everything in its proper place. But when you put something else there, whether that's money or it's power, oh my God, so many people worship power, right? I mean, look at what's happening in the world. It's just because of a worship of power, a worship of money, that it causes immense destruction when you put something else at the center and you worship it. Yeah.
So I think it's very difficult to be able to tell when that's happening, especially with like family and relationships they have with friends and so forth. So what would you say is a really good way to kind of look at that and say, okay, like my focus is too much that way, especially with parents, for example. You might have a love for them that's so strong, and we're taught that this is how you're supposed to love them. We're supposed to treat them a certain way and put them above all else. But at the same time, they shouldn't be the center of what our heart is. So kind of
How do you,
a
that balance? Yeah. So just repeat her question for those who didn't hear. She's saying it's really hard to sometimes tell, like it's subtle. That she gave the example of putting something else at the center. And how do you keep that balance? And she gave the example of parents, for example. Like we're told to love our parents and to put them, give them respect. But how do we not cross the line and keep that balance where we're not revolving around them? And that's a really, really important question. And it's, by the way, it's the same thing with our children. It's the same thing with our spouse. Anything that you love becomes a test for you, right? And this is where we have to find the proper balance. But how do you know what that is? Well, there's ways to keep that proper balance, and there's signs that you don't have that proper balance. And I'll just tell you that one of the signs of that you don't have that proper balance is extreme pain, actually. And that's the thing about pain, is that God gives us pain, yes, but pain serves a purpose. Sometimes we're just so interested in numbing pain, but we don't go and actually ask the pain, what's it trying to tell us? Because pain always is a messenger. Like, for example, if you had a heart problem, what would indicate that you had a heart problem? How would you know? I mean, you can't look inside your heart. You don't look in the mirror and see your arteries, right? So how do you know that you have a heart problem? Anyone? Chest pain, right? It's pain. And once you feel that chest pain, you realize, uh-oh, I need to see a doctor. But if you didn't feel that pain, you wouldn't know. Am I right? So pain is also an indicator to you that, hey, there's something you have to change. When you have an infection, how do you know you have an infection? Every time you feel pain, you just pop a pill, like a painkiller. So you have heart pain, you have chest pain, and you just numb it. You have an infection, and you just keep taking, Advil, and that's it. Well, what's going to happen? You know, there's actually a story I read. It was like a news article years ago about a dude who had tooth pain. And he went to the doctor, and the doctor told him that you have an infection. And he prescribed 2 medications. He prescribed a painkiller, and he prescribed an antibiotic, right? But the guy couldn't afford both. So which one do you think he picked? That's right, the painkiller, as we do. And you know what happened to his infection is it spread to his brain, and he died of the infection. So I thought that was really, really like telling that this is what we do. We numb the pain, but we don't go and try to address the cause. Okay? So sometimes when we're experiencing this excruciating, consistent pain in some department in our life, it's usually a sign that there's something internally we have to change. Okay, there's something maybe that's unhealthy in the attachment, that maybe this thing has been put in a place that it shouldn't be. You know, when your career or when your business is keeping you up at night and giving you so much anxiety that you need to take medicine and you can't sleep and you're just, it's like torturing you. That's a sign that you've made your business too important. You understand? Money. When you can't sleep at night because you're so worried about how much you're making or losing, that it becomes an obsession. That's a sign that you've made it too important. You've put money at the center. And if you put money at the center, it's going to torture you. You're going to be tortured by money. If you put your career at the center, and I warn you, I mean, there's a room full of people building a career, right? But if you put your career at the center of your existence, if you put it at the center in a place that it really shouldn't be, then your career will torture you. And it works the same way with your parents, it works the same way with your children, with your spouse, anything. And so one of the indicators really is that it becomes a source of torture for you. You don't have peace. You don't have peace here, you don't have peace here because of that thing. And that's because you've put it in the wrong compartment in the heart. And parents, one other thing I want to say is, another indicator is, if you're willing to do something that is forbidden by God for the sake of this thing, then that's another good indication that it's in the wrong compartment. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example. Maybe some parents, they're like really anti-hijab. And it's kind of like you're now put in this predicament, or maybe a spouse. You're now put in this predicament where, but in order to please my parents, I need to take off my hijab or not wear it. Or in order to please the person I'm marrying, they don't like hijab, right? I mean, I've heard so many weird stories about proposals where like the first question is, it's like, oh, she wears hijab, forget that. Like weird stuff like that, like rejecting someone for marriage because they wear hijab or stuff like that. And so some people will be pressured to take it off. Why? So they can get married. You know what I mean? Or their parents pressure them. It's just an example. And so when you're, or even if you look at money, right? Or status, like there's so much pressure to maybe appear a certain way. Like you want to have a certain type of house, you want to drive a certain type of car, even if it involves riba, if it involves usury, and it all tends to involve a lot of that, right? So then the question becomes, what's most important to me? Is it just so people can look at me and say, look at the car that they're driving, or look at that house, and then I don't really care that I'm taking interest in order to get that? So the choices that I make, that tells me a lot also about what's in my heart. So if I'm willing to break the rules of God for the sake of this thing, then that shows me that this thing is actually like an ilah for me. And sometimes that happens in career, right? You gotta sell alcohol, or you gotta, to make more money. That shows me that actually money is at the center. Because I'm willing to sell alcohol, I'm willing to get, involved with riba, I'm willing to do anything, even if it's haram, for the sake of money, or for the sake of my career, or for the sake of my parents. So that's another indicator. And then finally, I'll just give one last example. sometimes when we become so, and I mentioned this before, so obsessed with how we look and like what society deems as beautiful, I'm also willing to do things which are haram in order to fit that standard. The way I dress, right? Because society is gonna come and society keeps changing its standard of beauty, right? So one day society is gonna come and say, this is beautiful, right? This is how you're gonna look good. But then tomorrow it'll change, right? Now sometimes that standard is gonna be in contradiction to God's standard. Yes? No? It does, right? Sometimes a standard of dress, of what's considered fashionable or what's considered beautiful by society is going to be in complete opposition or completely opposite to what Allah says is beautiful and how we should dress. So now I'm faced with a choice, right? Which one do I obey? That gives me an indicator, like a practical indicator of what is really at the core of my heart. And if it's fashion, then I'm always going to obey fashion. Fashion can say anything he or she wants to, and I will obey it. There is a lot of samana wa atana when it comes to fashion. There is a lot of we hear and we obey when it comes to fashion, and I won't even get into skinny jeans, but you feel me? Like, do you feel me? Yes.
You said at one part that if you focus on your past, then you'll crash. And how do you stop that? How do you stop focusing on your past mistakes or experiences?
Okay, great question. And to reiterate, yes, when you focus on your past, you can crash. And to reiterate, or in other words, when you fixate on your past. So the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. What should we gain from our past? We should gain lessons. It's very, very important. I mean, we're not going to grow if we don't learn from our mistakes, right? We're not going to grow if we don't learn from our past experiences. But the problem is getting fixated, getting stuck. So how do you prevent that? I think one of the important ways to prevent that is to forgive ourselves. One of the problems we have is self-compassion. You know, a lot of us are so hard on ourselves, and we have very little compassion for ourselves. You know, you can have compassion for everyone else, right? Your friend comes to you and says, you know what, I really messed up. I made this big mistake. I did this thing and it's terrible. How do you respond to your friend? Most of you would probably not say, you good for nothing, useless piece of... You don't talk that way to your friend, right? I hope. Anyone? Right? Okay. And if you did, you probably won't have a relationship anymore. Okay? There's a certain way that you respond when your friend comes to you with a mistake that they made, right? You're probably going to be like, you know what? Everyone makes mistakes. You have to just move forward, you know, make amends, and move. You're going to be like encouraging. You're going to have this thing called compassion, I assume. Right? Yeah? Okay. Well, what happens when you make a mistake? How do you talk to yourself? How do you treat yourself when you make a mistake? So something in your past that you did wrong, or something in your past that hurt you, do you give yourself the same compassion? That's important. We have to learn self-compassion. So being able to forgive yourself for not being perfect. Because no one is. No one's perfect. So allowing yourself to be human and having compassion for yourself, forgiving yourself. And of course, if you make a mistake, ask Allah for forgiveness. But also forgive yourself. Because that's one of the things that holds us back. One of the things that holds us back is we hold ourselves to this like superhuman level of perfection. And when we don't reach that, we won't reach that because we're human. It's like, it's against the human design. We're not perfect. You know, Adam ate from the tree. What do you think we're supposed to learn from that? Is that we're not perfect. We're going to slip. Even he slipped, and he's a prophet. He became a prophet. But we're taught that how we should respond is we repent, we ask God, and then we move forward. We don't fixate on our mistakes. We don't fixate on the painful things in our past. We learn and we keep going, and we don't lose hope. But a big part of that is forgiving yourself and having compassion. I'm not perfect, and I can't be perfect because God didn't create humans to be perfect. It's impossible. So don't hold yourself to a standard that's impossible, because you'll always fall short. And then if you give up every time you fall short, then you won't be able to move forward. Yeah.
How do we tell between test and punishment, and how do we deal with both those situations?
Okay, so how do you tell the difference between a test and a punishment? Someone might go through a hardship, and for one person it's a punishment, for another person it's a test, or even a purification. The answer to that is it depends on how you respond. So a person who comes through their hardships and becomes closer to Allah, becomes better, becomes purified, then you know that's not a punishment, because it's made you better. The fear is that when our hardships make us further from Allah, make us hardened inside, make us resentful and angry at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is a sign that we have to change internally something. We have to purify. It can also be a mercy in that it's a wake-up call. Because if I find myself responding in that way, with anger, resentment, and it's bringing me away from God, then that's a wake-up call for me that I need to rectify internally. But yeah, the way you know is by your response.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, one more question. Who's it going to be? When I have this situation, I ask people who has the most important question. And usually everyone thinks that they do, but who really does?
Why don't we listen to all of theirs?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll listen to the question and then see if I can kind of I'm not gonna pick the most important. I'm just gonna try to
Spark notes it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'll do. Yes, here, give me your question.
So what do you do when other people constantly bring about your past, or your environment is always reminding you of it?
That's a very good question. I'm gonna come to that. Yeah.
You talked about elements of first aid to nurture your spirit and everything. Doesn't it in any kind involve society and serving humankind? Everything you mentioned, it involves ibadat, but none of ma'amalat or anything with the society. So I'm just...
Okay, thank you. And that's because that's its own lecture. And I actually have probably about 50 of them on YouTube. But yes, you're absolutely right. Actually, it's interesting because probably for the last year, every single talk I gave was about service. Literally. I focused this one on this one aspect, but you're absolutely right. A humongous part of both psychological and spiritual well-being is service to others. Those of you who've ever heard me talk about this, I give there's something I call a platinum rule. You guys know the golden rule? What is it? Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you, yeah? Some version of that. In our religion, in the Quran and the Sunnah, you find there's a platinum rule, even higher than the golden rule. And that is do unto others as you would like God to do unto you. Okay? How I treat other people becomes a reflection of how God treats me. So you're absolutely right. There's so much in our deed about getting closer to God by serving the creation. So that's its own, and I have many talks online about that. Even in the and I talk about it from a psychological perspective too. There's so much research. Do you remember how I mentioned in positive psychology that there's a lot of research about happiness? And I said that the power of gratitude. The second most powerful practice that they found in increasing happiness is service to others. So that's absolutely, whether you talk about it from an Islamic perspective or a psychological perspective, is essential. But yeah, I just focused on one aspect, but you're absolutely right. And I'm going to get to you. Yes, your question.
So you spoke a lot about Salah as a spiritual oxygen or kind of, first aid. But I think there's some stigma in the Muslim community against mental health, seeking out mental health. And so, of course, I know that you're saying it's both and, it's not
Yeah.
an either or situation, but what kind of pushback do you get from Muslim communities about, seeking out mental health? Because there is so much stigma and people want to maintain that prestige of perfection.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's why I mentioned that, even religiously, we're told to take, in Islam it's called asbab, and it means, it translates to the means, taking the means. There's a tradition of the Prophet ﷺ where he told one of the companions, this companion wasn't tying his camel, and when he asked him why, he said, because I have my trust in God. So he instructed him, ''aqilha wa tawakkal," which means tie your camel and put your trust in Allah. Do both simultaneously. So in the case of someone who needs mental health assistance or they need therapy, that would be their tying of the camel, right? Just like if you're sick, going to the doctor is tying your camel. Taking medicine is tying your camel. And so getting help from the creation is the tying the camel. And at the same time, put your trust in Allah. And I mentioned that briefly, that Allah is the healer, but Allah uses tools. These are the means. So even if you're taking medicine, it's not the medicine that heals you, but that God uses the medicine to heal you. And it's the same thing with therapy. And you're right, there is a stigma. We are slowly moving through that. I think we've come a long way, especially in the United States. We are far ahead in terms of a lot of the, reducing a lot of the stigma when it comes to mental health. But we also have to be careful, again, to keep the balance, because we can also go to the other side, where we just look at the human being as a machine, look at mental health as only a biological issue. And it definitely, there's a biological aspect, but there's also a spiritual aspect, and there's also a psychological and mental aspect. So I like to look at it as a sort of holistic view when it comes to mental health. It isn't only the chemicals in our brain, but it's also so many other aspects of our being. Our psychology, our how we think is very important. And our spirituality. So I would just say that taking a middle path and reducing this, absolutely, it's both. It's tying the camel and putting our trust in God. And remember this, balance. We have to be a people of the middle path. We can't take one or the other. I feel like with mental health, it's like we take these camps, these extreme camps. It's either, it's all psychological, it's all medical, it's all biological, or the other extreme, which is if you have faith, you'll never have any issues. So it's neither of these extremes. It's in the middle, and we have to realize that human being is more than just one or the other. But we're physical beings, we're spiritual beings, we're mind, heart, soul, everything. Okay, did you have something you want to add? Okay. I'll just hear yours quickly, and then I'm going to address hers, and then we'll be done, inshallah.
So you mentioned a really good point about how we live in a very superficial society. How for the unmarried people here, how does one reconcile the kind of expectations that other unmarried people who are looking for a spouse, and the expectations that they have, when they usually tend to go with a very superficial perspective when they're seeking a spouse, but at the same time not compromising on your values and staying true to who you are? How do women do that, especially, and also men in a society where men usually have a really unrealistic expectation, and women sometimes have a habit of falling into that or wanting to be that perfect woman?
Yeah, I understand. So, great question. She's saying that for the people who are, for example, looking to get married in a society that is obsessed with looks, and the fact that there's this push for women and men to fit a certain standard, and maybe very unrealistic expectations. So how do you kind of not fall into that? And I would say that the only way and the most important thing you have to do is focus on the source of all provision. Focus on the source of all provision. What do I mean by that? Okay, this is so important. Risk. The word risk means provision. What does provision mean? What is risk? Risk is money. Risk is health. Risk is a good spouse, good children. All of these come under the category of provision and blessings and gifts. Who's the source of those things? That's what we have to come back and focus on. It's Ar-Razzaq, which is Allah. So what we have to do is sort of sift through all this, like, there's a lot of illusions out there, right? We think that, okay, if we think I'm gonna get a good spouse by taking off my hijab, or looking a certain way, or acting a certain way, then we're deceived. Because that's not where risk comes from. Provision comes from God. That's what we have to remember. Provision comes from God. So if you want goodness, you have to seek it from God. And you're not gonna get goodness from God by displeasing God. Make sense? It's sort of like the person who wants a raise and they think, okay, I want a promotion, so I'm gonna do absolutely nothing that the boss wants me to do. I'm gonna do everything opposite. I'm not gonna, the boss tells me to do this, I'm gonna do the opposite. And I'm expecting a raise. I'm expecting a promotion. This is what we do with Allah. Like, we break His rules and then we hope for good, which is illogical. So I think that really it's about going back to the source and asking the source and doing your best to do right by Allah, because Allah is the one who's going to give you that spouse and that good job and that health and all the things that you want. And practically, I would say this: there's du'as that you can make. There's things that you can do that we're told increases our provision. One thing I'll give you is the dua of Musa alayhi salam. Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. It's actually a verse in the Quran in which Musa alayhi salam, he says to Allah, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. Oh my Lord, I am poor for whatever good you send down to me. Repeat that dua a lot. And when he said this dua, we know from his story, he went and he was in a really, really bad situation at that point. He had accidentally killed a man, and now he's escaping basically this, the persecution of these people want to kill him. And after that, he got married and got a job. So that's a good thing. So Rabbi inni bima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. So repeat that a lot. The adhkar are very powerful. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That's another one that repeating a lot brings provision and removes barriers. And the other thing I want to say is istighfar. So saying a lot of istighfar, repentance. The Prophet ﷺ said that when you repent, when you do a lot of istighfar, it gives you, it solves a problem. If you have a difficulty, it gives you a way out of that difficulty. It protects you from anxiety, and it provides you from places that you never imagined. These are consequences of our dhikr, of our adhkar. So that's what I would say for someone in that situation. And don't never think that you'll get good from anywhere other than Allah. There's no other source of goodness, right? Now your question, and I'll end with this. What happens when your environment is pushing you back or is pulling you down and reminding you of your past? The first thing that I have to say is do your utmost to have a more healthy environment. And that may or may not be possible at this exact moment, but it is an important principle that we try to be in a healthy environment because we're affected by our environment. The Prophet ﷺ said that a person is on the way of their closest friend. That being around good company is like entering a perfume shop, right? You end up either with perfume or you smell better. And being with bad company is like going in a blacksmith shop. You either get burnt or you come out smelling bad, okay? So your company matters, your environment matters. Now, if you can, try to find better company that isn't pulling you down, that isn't toxic, right? That's number one. If that's not possible at that given moment, but that should be your goal, right? Your goal should be to be around a healthy environment and around people who are good for you. Make sense? But sometimes, for a temporary amount of time, maybe someone is a child and they can't get out of that situation, etc. Then in that case, it's like a person who works in a radioactive plant. What do you got to do? Like, that's your job. What do you got to do? Wear a lot of protection, okay? And in this case, the protection is the remembrance of Allah. When you do, like, you remember the three things I said, the Salah, the adhkar, and the Quran? That's like wearing protection in a radioactive plant. Because you can't get out of that situation for whatever reason. And I hope it's temporary, because you should never like keep yourself in a toxic environment like that. But in the meantime, you just have to make sure you're well protected. You know, I'll just end on this anecdote. One time I told someone this in the audience, and she's like, I do work at a radioactive, like she actually worked at one. I was like, wow. I gave her that example. I'm like, suppose you worked at a, and she's like, I do. Anyways, inshallah we'll wrap up there. جزاكم الله خيرا. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.